definitely do some Wesley, for sure. Alright. Excellent. Alright. Let's see. Where are we at the time? Got 2 minutes. Do some Wesley. Some Tootsie footage for everybody to enjoy before we get started here in about a minute, 2 minutes. We'll let her take a snooze on the futon. All right. Tootsie, where are you going? So maybe I'll start off with just a simple face. Like a little cartoony self-portrait to start off with here. And in my quarantine beard here. Quick little hand here. A little bit of a looser style. Sometimes I use regular pencil. I've got some Bic number 2 mechanical pencils too. It's kind of whatever is around. Mechanical pencils are really nice because you don't have to sharpen them. I mean, that's a lot of people know that. But sometimes just a regular pencil is nice too. Sometimes a regular pencil doesn't let you go in and do a ton of noodling with the drawing and overwork and make it super overly precise. Sometimes it's nice to keep some looseness in there. I always think of people like Mark Silvestri, who keeps his pencils really loose, but like really sharp too. Or I know it's probably the inkers who come in and sharpen it up. But I think he's a mechanical pencil guy. Give myself very cartoony short legs here. That's kind of fun. Ba, 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 ba. Got some other drawings too that I haven't finished inking yet, so we can do some inking stuff too. I'll ink this too. That's probably pretty good. Blue pencil, I have a blue pencil and I've tried to use it. I guess if you do all the work on one board and you ink direct from your blue pencils, it doesn't interfere and you don't have to erase it. But erasing has never been a huge problem. And I lightbox a lot of the time from like a cheaper paper to a better board. So I still don't have to erase, or I work digitally and I don't have to worry about that at all. Some people swear by blue pencil. I don't know. It's fine. I don't know. I just it hasn't made its way into my permanent workflow. It just seems like an extra step. I'd like to see the gray because then you still see some of the value. I don't know. And value is kind of important even when I translate stuff to black and white inks. Let's see. Maybe I'll put a little cartoon of Tootsie down here too. My new dog. For those of you who don't know me. Whenever I do a cartoon of myself for my classroom, I always put myself with a shirt and tie, but I usually have a shirt and tie in those situations. You know, Tootsie's little Grinch feet because she has hair between her toes. It kind of looks like a frog there. That's okay. Sometimes she actually sits like a frog. Let's see. Well, let's just jump into inks because inks are fun. I've got a Pilot parallel brush pen. I think it's just a pen because it's not really a brush. It's got a square tip at the end of it, which makes it kind of difficult to use because I kind of end up using a point a lot. But it also has this really nice flat edge. A lot of people like Bill Sienkiewicz, I think is his name. He does a lot with the Pilot pen, the Pilot parallel brush pen. Kent Williams does a lot with it. There's a lot of people who use it. Jim Mahfood is a big one. So be careful if you Google those because those guys aren't always all ages appropriate. Great artists, but not always for everybody. That's not too bad. Sometimes the lines you get from it take on a life of their own and it's kind of really nice, but sometimes it doesn't want to cooperate. I think it's more not cooperating right now, but that's okay. Because we can always swap out a brush. Got a trusty brush pen. Yeah, anything by Pentel is usually pretty good. All these Pentel things are pretty great. Inking is really nice because mostly the work is already done, so you're just going in and punching it up a little bit, increasing contrast and fixing little things in the drawings. Jim Mafu did. He put out. He's put out a bunch of stuff. I think there's a pop-up book he's trying to sell on Kickstarter right now. For Weird Alpaca style is somebody really famous said something like the style is a collection of all your mistakes. I mean, I definitely remember there's some people growing up that I really, really liked that I tried to copy, and then they never got anywhere close to being as good as them. But Adam Kubert, he's one of the Kubert brothers, the sons of Joe Kubert, who's a really famous comic book artist. He was a really big influence on me growing up. So maybe some of like the kind of how I make things angular is because of how he does comics. And I mean, things are evolving all the time. I think also the tools you use are a big part of the style that you have. Because I didn't really use any reference for this stuff, but typically I use a lot of photo reference for what I do. It doesn't mean it looks exactly like the photo, but I'm referencing stuff a lot. And then sometimes I can make the leap and kind of fill in the gaps of like when I don't have photo reference for stuff. Also using brush pens, that can kind of affect your style. I always try and think of artists that are my heroes while I'm working, but my stuff doesn't end up looking like them. It's just kind of like I think about what they've done and it gives me permission to fail. It's like, well, they were more free with the line, so maybe I'll try and be a little bit more free with the line. It's kind of an evolving thing for sure. This is a brush pen. I don't know if you guys can see that. It's got synthetic fibers at the end of it, and what that does is there's a barrel inside this pen that contains ink. So it's basically like working with a brush, except you don't have to dip that brush into a little ink container. Like you don't have to dip it into something like this. You can just kind of work with it. So it makes it really fast. And this one has goes very, very thin at the top, even though it's a pretty large brush. And so you can get a lot of variety with just one tool. So this has been one of my go-to things when I'm drawing analog without digital. But the digital tools I use kind of emulate this brush too, for the most part. Sometimes I like the nice clean line. A lot of my heroes like Bill Sienkiewicz or like Simon Bisley or like Kent Williams or Sean Phillips. Sometimes they want their stuff to look real craggy and dirty, and that's a lot of fun. I've got some old dirty brushes too. Let's see, I lost the questions. Like this one is even fallen apart a couple times. I purposely don't clean this one, so that way I have like a nice like gritty texture with the brush. Yeah, I've been reading a lot about the Hunt 102, like all the guys over at Cartoonist Kayfabe, which is a really good YouTube channel, but they swear a lot and cover mature stuff, so just be aware of that. But like just the edges of using this craggy brush have such great texture. Like I'm just kind of goofing around now. Like anybody who's read comics like since the 90s or whatever has probably seen like those cross-hatched Rob Liefeld type backgrounds. And those are great, but I much prefer this kind of like gritty, messy background to be like a background fill when you don't feel like drawing buildings or trees. Much more fun. And then you scan those textures in. It just looks so good on the computer screen because typically digital art isn't real messy. Or well, I mean it can be now because you can do anything pretty much, but bringing that messy stuff into the digital is always kind of a fun thing. And then as it dries out, you can even do some shading. But I'm not going to get too much into that. That's kind of fun. I lost the screen again. Where did I put that? Yeah, we'll cap that off. Yeah, this is acrylic black ink. So what that means is this will dry on the board, and you can paint over the top of it. I mean, other ink is permanent too, but this stuff definitely will stay there. It's like acrylic paint. Oh, that's funny. I answered that question. I didn't even read that question yet. Just figured since I showed it off. I think this is even like Walmart brand. Like I think you can get this at Walmart. But I just like to have all the tools because then I can play a lot with whatever I'm doing. Should I do a different tool? There's also, let's see, what are these called? These are dagger brushes, meaning that they just kind of have a shape of a dagger. I'd let this one get kind of craggy too, like my other brush. It's half laziness, half liking the texture. But if I got rid of the cragginess, then I probably wouldn't like it as much. Maybe I'll try and ink more with this guy. Yeah, it's kind of fun. Another thing with inking too is when you do it analog, you kind of have to be brave and just go in for a line. Don't hem and haw over it. Although this thing has plenty of hemming and hawing in it already. But that's when it's more like an arm movement than a hand movement. Kind of a quick hand. They're probably not exactly anatomically correct, but if you're working on drawing hands, you can kind of break them apart into three things. There's like the pads of the hand. There's like a big thumb pad and then like a minor pad opposite the thumb, and then like this forehand pad, and then the fingers. Maybe the thumb kind of bends out a little bit, and then let's see. I think that according to how your hand appears, I mean, you got to look at your hands too. I don't know if this is actually accurate. I think the ring finger might be the longest, but the middle finger and the placement of the hand might be the longest. You just got to look at your own hands a lot. That's the trick. I use Weird Alpaca's asking about digital tools. I really like Clip Studio. I've used Photoshop for a really long time. I still jump into Photoshop sometimes, but Clip Studio has pretty much replaced Photoshop for drawing for me, just because it's a lighter program. It's meaning it takes up less space on your hard drive, and it's kind of designed specifically for drawing. So a lot of the tools that Photoshop just got to in their last updates, like brush smoothing and stuff like that, Clip Studio's had for a long time. And I think their brushes are like just as good or almost as good as what you can get in Photoshop. And Clip Studio is a lot less expensive. Like the premium edition of it is only $300. I say only, but you only have to pay that once, and then you have it forever. Though with the version for iPad is $70 a year, and I've been doing that too because it's nice to be able to bring along like whatever device I have and like ink pages and stuff. Yeah, this is getting a little gritty now. Maybe like a kind of like a Sam Keith, if anybody knows Sam Keith. Not that I presume to be anywhere near as good as him, but some of these lines are starting to take on some of his rougher qualities here. That's one thing I really like is like a lot of ink texture. Like a lot of those guys from the early '90s were doing that. Like Jay Lee before he got real sharp. I mean, his stuff now is good too, but I don't know. There's something about an artist like choosing to do a style that's maybe not as realistic or really pushing the texture. It's something I'm always trying to do, but I'm always trying to make things sharp and holding back too, so it's tough. Yeah. Jay Lee, Sam Keith. Some good ones. I was just watching the Cartoonist Kayfabe thing of the first issue of Lobo with Keith Giffen breakdowns and Simon Bisley finishes. We were talking about that. There's some really nice brush rendering, ink rendering. They're doing a lot of different stuff in there. Maybe I'll switch over to this deleter pen. I just bought this on Amazon. This is all messy too. I should probably clean my tools more, but I don't know. But this is a company out of Japan, I think. I think this is almost like the equivalent of a Hunt 102, but I'm not 100% sure. I gotta actually track down like a real Hunt 102 and actually try that and see if it's something I've already worked with, because I've heard about it for years, and I usually just buy like the brown speedball pens and nibs. Yeah, and I those might be a Hunt 102 already, and I don't know. If they work, they work. If they give me that nice sharp line that I like, then we're good to go. I found though that this deleter pen has worked a lot better than the speedball packaged pens. I don't know what it is, but it's like every other one is a good one. But these, I've gotten a couple of them and they've been good out of the gate, and I haven't really had to mess around much. Oop. Some ink splatters are always good. You just get a few in there. You can always use gouache to go over it later if you really don't like them. Let's see. It's looking pretty visible. Yeah. Oh, the problem is now I put that ink over on the side where my hand has to be. That's another lesson. When you're inking, you want to start, well, if you're right-handed, you want to start left to right, so that way you can kind of fill in all the spaces. But sometimes maybe I ink on the right-hand side so I can take a break and go get a sandwich or something. I'll let the ink dry. Sometimes breaks are good. If you guys are artist types, sometimes you lose many hours while you're working on stuff. Forget to eat and stuff like that. But it's better to do that kind of stuff when you're just like enjoying what you're doing rather than deadlines. So that's usually a good thing. Wow, I'm getting ink all over this side. That's alright, I'll probably go nuts filling that in with some other stuff. Yeah, I'll fill in that whole space. Yeah, if you don't get your whole hand covered in ink while you're inking, then are you really inking? I don't know. Let's see. Maybe I'll just go back to that brush. We'll knock this out and then we'll do maybe a drawing of what do I do when I drop that extra gob of ink? Then I go back to the Craggy brush and just fill it in black. Or scan it, bring it into the computer. There's actually some Procreate brushes that have fingerprints, like inky fingerprints that you can put right in digitally. An easy way to recover. Not just draw over it. I mean, I've got, where did I put that? I've got some white deleter ink that it's like artist gouache. You can go over it after it dries and fill it back in. Like, yeah, I had some little drawings that I did that had some white deleter ink on them. I set them at a spot where I knew I would have them in case anybody asked that question, but it obviously wasn't that good of a space. Alright, here we go. Let's knock this out. If it gets a little messy, that's alright. We'll switch over to that deadline style. Yeah, the fingerprint is a newer thing. I just remember, like, when I was in school, my art teachers, they were always pretty happy with me, but they would say, you got to be neater with your work. And yeah, I understand the need for that on some level, but all like those German expressionist artists, like Egon Schiele, or maybe not so much Gustav Klimt, but some of those guys who did the ink engravings, I can't remember. Oskar Kokoschka, I think he's another one. They would, their styles will be real rough. I don't know, there's just something about that just appeals to me. I don't know if it's like the the clear dark, the chiaroscuro of it, or the texture. Just when things are too clean, it just starts to become too sterile. I don't know, and I think humans who look at art are programmed to respond better with a little bit of humanity in there. That's what I say to my students a lot of the time. Like when they're concerned that their artwork isn't photorealistic or it doesn't look exactly how they wanted it to look, I would say I'm more interested in the humanity than the perfection. Because if I wanted it to look like a photo, we'd just take photos. And you see a lot of stuff like that. Just think about cartoons. Like SpongeBob's not realistic. Very popular character. Bugs Bunny's not realistic. There's room in the world for some stylization. And even stylization that's you're going for realism but fall short. There's some stylization right there. Well, Bugs Bunny is real. It just doesn't look exactly like a real rabbit. But I know I'm being a literalist right now, responding exactly to a joke. That's pretty good. Yeah, this brush pen, man. When you need to get stuff done, brush pen is the way to go. Other stuff is fun to play around with, but when time is of the essence, the brush pen is very nice. I'll put another couple more in there. Why not? I mean, once an area's already compromised with a handprint or a dot or something like that, just go for it, see what happens. Even if you don't like it in that piece, you can always scan it and drop it in the background of something else digitally. If you've got some digital tools. You don't even need digital tools. You can cut and paste right out of the paper, do a paste ups like they used to do before everything was digital. Alright. Mostly because I want to get to a Wesley here. Speech bubbles. Very important to leave space around the outside of the word and have the tail pointing at somebody, at the person who's talking. There we go. That's not too bad. Weird alpaca. I draw every day, maybe for about an hour at least. I try to get that much time in. Like after I get some other stuff that I have to get done for work or chores or anything like that. Sometimes I wake up really early just to get a little bit of time drawing in. If I don't get a little bit of drawing in, I'm a pretty happy person. Like I don't think anybody would notice I hadn't drawn in a day, but if I don't draw in a day, I definitely don't feel the same. About an hour, and it might even just be 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there throughout the day. But I'm also working on stuff for my job. I'm working on stuff for the books that book singular right now that I'm working on. Well, I guess I'm working on a couple books. But I'm working on a book about my character Wesley the Robot, who is my signature character. I came up with him like 15, 16 years ago now. He's the equipment... hold on one second. This is going to be noisy. He was once an emergency alert system, or weather emergency alert system, and then at a college radio station, and then he came alive one day, just kind of like Frosty the Snowman, and then went on adventures. So he's kind of got a very spherical head. When I was designing him, I was looking at a lot of CD players. This is back in 2007, 2008. Like CD players at retail places that had the speakers kind of on the side of them, and then like they would have the disc and readout and stuff in the front here. I thought that was interesting to have the speakers kind of like wrapping around a circular or spherical objects. So he's got some speakers on the side of his face here too. And he's got this oscillator that represents his speech. So you see the different waveforms of him speaking when he talks instead of a mouth moving. Originally he had kind of more of a generic kind of boxy robot shape, but I wanted him to be a little bit different. I mean, when you're drawing a humanoid robot, there's variation you can do, but there's definitely similarities to a lot of different things. It's mostly his personality and what he does that might separate him. Just give him some circular eyes. I started giving him just like a seam line that goes through his right ocular sensor there. Given some big shoulder pads, very inspired by 90s comics. Cable, Wolverine, all the Rob Liefeld stuff. Which kind of doesn't really fit him because he as a character is not really extreme. He's very reluctant for action. He just likes to learn stuff. He's about learning different things. Just kind of peaceful. We can give him some pouches. We can get his basic structure here. The nice thing about him, though, is that he's basically like a human skeleton with a couple different things, like a couple different joints. His arms are a little longer. He's a little bit taller. I don't know how tall he is. Maybe like 7 feet tall. We've drawn his height many times in the comic book I'm working on. But I don't like to have any hard and fast rules with how characters appear. I think it's more about the expression of like what you're going to achieve. Like, there's some people who very much are into the architectural drawing of everything and making sure that everything is consistent. I'm much more in the expressionist school. You want to express what's going on in the moment. As long as it feels right, it doesn't have to necessarily be 100% accurate. Or as close as you can get to how you want it to feel. Because, everybody falls a little short from what they actually want to see. There's some circular joints here. It's kind of like claw hands. Those are kind of fun to draw. When I redesigned him, I also wanted him to be a little bit more insect-like. A little bit, like his personality is not angry or threatening or scary, but I wanted his physical presence to be scary or kind of alien. Arms that kind of extend. Definitely inspired by one of my favorite Marvel characters here, Machine Man, a Jack Kirby creation. Here's a drawing I did a while ago that I colored in. It's got some extending arms. It's pretty cool. The only superhero named Aaron that I'm aware of at this time. There may have been one since I found out that his name was that, but not aware of it yet. Can't know everything. Things are changing all the time. What's nice in the Wesley comic is that the other characters are human, so there's a lot of structure to them, a lot of perspective. You need to have angles correct and all that stuff. But when I draw Wesley, he's a little bit more, he's the more expressionistic character. It's kind of like, if anybody knows Warlock from the New Mutant series, he's not that loose. He's not like that Bill Sienkiewicz. But there's a bit of that in there sometimes. Have him get a little bit looser. think his arms can extend a little bit. Not quite Machine Man level. He's got pretty good reach. Sometimes it's nice to give a little bit of a human pose to a robot. Give him some. Looks like he's like stepping down on some different level surface there. I've tried to use rulers and French curves and triangles and stuff like that, and I don't know. They're just, it doesn't. At the final stage, it doesn't go together for me. So I try and freehand everything. I know. I talk about Mark Silvestri a lot. And he's a really, really good artist. I mean, I'm nowhere near his level, but he freehands everything too. He tries to not use rulers or anything like that in his drawings, and I think it's just the imperfections of the hand. Like just by virtue of you drawing it, and it, even if it's wrong, you drew everything else too, so it's going to look like it goes together more than if you tried to draw it perfectly. And like I was saying earlier, like I'm more concerned with the expressionist stuff, and usually like buildings are not terribly expressive. I mean, they can be. I mean, if you have any architecture people out there, like find architecture very expressive, but I don't know. I like human form and like bodies that express motion. Like the thing with Wesley is like his body language kind of is more expressive than his facial features, even though because he's a drawing, there is some variation that you can do, and you can get some nice emotion out of his face, even though if he was an actual physical object, there wouldn't be that variation. That's not too bad of a Wesley right there. Little leg joint there. Yeah, that's not too bad. All right, I didn't think I was going to get to the inking that quick. Alright, let's go back to that deleter. Or you don't look be fun. Got some of this spray ink I picked up from an art conference. This is kind of fun. Love these kind of textures. This is the fun part. Kind of play around with some of this stuff. Kind of put some of those textures in there. Maybe do like a dot there. Just some of that randomness makes stuff look nice. All right. Well, I've drawn Wesley a whole lot of times, and he's a little bit less work than drawing people, so he can be drawn pretty quick. Because his basic form is kind of where a regular person starts. But what's fun about him too is that he's chrome, so you can do like little drawing effects to try and make him look shinier. Do the shorthand of shiny. The shorthand of shiny. Like if anybody remembers like Wolverine's shoulder pads from the 90s, they did a lot of stuff like this. Maybe some people still do. If I ever got a gig doing X-Men, I would do all that stuff too. But I like this brown costume too. I'd have to do the shoulder pads. I'd have to, because that's what stayed with me. I'd have to just bring it back. Might have to go in digitally and add those pouches. Although pouches would make sense for him since he doesn't have any pockets. He seems like somebody who would pick stuff up and carry it along if it was interesting. these little basic perspective tricks, like having all the lines going the right way, so it looks like these little claws are coming out in the right direction. Publishing my own comics, I always wanted to do it. Before I was working on the Wesley books, I did a book called Pizza's Pizza, Son of a Pizza Man. It was something that I always meant to do, and I used to run into people I was friends with in high school, and they would ask, "Oh, did you do your first comic book yet?" And I had done pages and stuff, but nothing as a large collected story. I was always going to, but something that kind of gave me a kickstart was that my one friend who used to message me all the time on Facebook and say, "Hey, when are you gonna do your comic? Like, you have any comics done yet?" And he sadly passed away a couple years ago. So, like with that, it's just kind of like, oh hey, nothing is guaranteed. So, if this is something you want to do, you got to get going on it. So since then, I've started working on pieces of comics here and there. Got the Wesley the Robot thing I'm working on. I finished, and I started working on Pizza's Pizza digitally. Well, the style I do is kind of inverse of what most professional comic artists do now. Is I will draw things traditionally, like on sketchbook paper or on Bristol board paper or marker paper, and then take a picture of it with my phone, bring it into Clip Studio, and then ink it digitally. So I draw it traditionally and ink it digitally. Although some stuff is purely digital, some stuff is purely traditional. I jump around a little bit, but I think the stuff that I'm kind of liking the best is drawn traditionally and inked digitally. And I just really wanted to get a comic book done. I thought Pizza's Pizza was kind of like a fun concept. I hammered out the concept of that with a friend of mine on a road trip to Pittsburgh one time. And I worked on that for about 2 years. Oh yeah, should I do a shameless plug? Yeah, why not? So, and then Pizza's Pizza was like just an effort to like stay with something long enough to finish it. That's this book here. Let's see if we can see that. Pizza's Pizza, Son of a Pizza Man. Time to fight pizza with Pizza. Has to fight some anchovy zombies who are converted to anchovy zombies with bad sauce. So that's kind of a fun story, kind of like Walking Dead meets Ninja Turtles. Rated T for some gun and anchovy violence. So, that's in there, but it's pretty light. I think I'm probably more cautious with my work than really putting my work out there than most people. But it's pretty safe. Then the series I'm working on now, which is might turn out to be a longer story actually, or even an ongoing, is Wesley the Robot. For those of you guys who are fans of Todd McFarlane, you might see that this composition is a little similar to his Hulk fighting Wolverine with the blades reflecting Wolverine from back in the day. And I even put a little After McFarlane in there. I don't know if you can see it or not. Where is it? There it is. But that's in there. And he has a fight in there. In the back of these too, because he is a college radio robot, are some interviews that I've done over the years with bands and stuff that I've liked. So it's a little bit of a music zine in the back too. Like if anybody's ever read some of those books that Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips have worked on, they have articles about movies in the back of the book. And I was inspired by that to put some of my articles that I already had done in the back. Because one of my other dreams is to be the artist who does the portrait of musicians in the back of Rolling Stone. So I just did it myself. All right, where'd I put that pen? And unofficially, Pizza's Pizza is set in Oswego. If you look closely, you might, if you end up getting a chance to look through the book, you'll see that there's some familiar backgrounds in there. If you're an Oswego native. Yeah, this guy's coming out pretty good. I have so many extra drawings of Wesley just kicking around. Maybe they'll show up in future issues. And I draw Wesley out of my head a lot too, but I do look at poses of real people for him sometimes. Or I even have little figurines. Like if I'm doing a very complicated pose, or if I want it to look like it's very much grounded in reality. I'll pose that stuff and take photos with my phone. And then look at those while I'm drawing. That's what's so great about phones, is you can have them hooked up to like your Google account or any other kind of cloud storage, and then they'll just pop up in your cloud shortly after that, so you can pull it from many different devices, like an iPad or your phone or even a computer. Just have your computer screen up and then draw freehand from the photo. Because sometimes, like things that look perfect can be nice. I'm always looking for that expressive quality, like the life in the line. I used to have a professor in college would say when you work on stuff too much and it gets too perfect, it starts to lose some of that life. And that's something I'm always trying to build in, with varying degrees of success, you know, but you gotta always be trying. Some of the best work I ever made was just because I was in there trying. Not necessarily more effort than some of the other work I was working on, but just I happened to be working, and it happened to result. Definitely some panels and pages in Wesley that are a result of that. Just not like working harder, but just like working enough that the good stuff happened. Another moral of the story there is don't be too hard on yourself if your stuff doesn't look how you want it to look, or if it doesn't look realistic. Because there's a lot of very famous cartoonists and artists who their stuff might not look real, but it's instantly recognizable as their work, and that is probably more valuable than being able to render things perfectly. It's making things instantly recognizable as your own. That's very valuable. Yeah, I'm actually liking this drawing a lot right now. Maybe this will be a cover. Who knows? Avoid drawing. I don't avoid drawing stuff, but like if it's something that's not like really that enjoyable to draw, it may be more gestural. It may be more kind of just the impression of that thing. Although sometimes I take on challenging things to draw just because they're challenging. like issue number 6 of Wesley the Robot. I'm working on issue number 5 right now. There is a horse, and a horse is a main thing in that issue. And I've been assembling my reference, and we'll see what happens. I've drawn out horses a couple times, and so far so good. So far so good. But the beauty of this thing is I'm my own boss on this, so I don't have to have drawings of horses done very quickly. So if I look back through it after I get the story serviceable, so I can read through it, and I really notice that some stuff is not looking that great, I can jump back in and fix it. So the other thing that I don't like to draw, because I like to draw from life a lot, so like there's another saying, like when people are drawing, when you're doing a drawing from observation, draw it like you've never seen it before, meaning you want to get away from like the symbolic mental representation in your head that you have of that thing. And if you like draw it upside down or whatever, it'll look more like that thing, because you're not focusing on making it go along with what you have in your brain for that image too. So everything, I mean, I like to draw, so there's not much I don't like to draw. Writing a longer story. I'm probably not a great example for outlining things. I mostly have a plot in my head of what is going to happen, and I'll write out the general plot, and then I will start to think of what's going to happen in each issue, and I'll write down what's going to happen in each issue, and then when I start drawing, I'll start laying out my panels, and I'll put little writing of what's going to happen in each panel to the side of it. But so that's very, very loose. I know some people work on very tight scripts. The guys who do Cartoonist Kayfabe talk about. I mean, I think they do write scripts, but they talk about, since they're the one person who's working on the book, like if they come up with something better, they have the ability to kind of like pause and swap out those pieces. And that's kind of how I work too, because I like to find a lot of reference. A lot of my time working on comics, I'm looking for good reference, and I look at sites like Pexels. They have free public use images, and I'll look at those and combine them with other stuff, and then like stuff out of my head. Because sometimes whole plot points can change. Like if I find a really, really great reference image that's free to use, and it fits into the story in maybe a different way, I'll totally change it to use that reference photo. Because I'm definitely coming at this from more of the art side. Though I like to write, I'm just dazzled by the art side. Never got over it. Maybe someday I'll become more of a writer. But I have things just occur to me like when I'm doing other stuff for part of the story, and Wesley is kind of like a quasi memoir. Like it's very loosely based on things that really happened and kind of sensationalized. So he runs into stuff like that. So luckily drawing a book takes so long that many different ideas will occur to you of what to do for the next project before you're finished working on that book. So I'm never really stuck with what to do. Yeah, I need to do some more research with Eric Larson. I really like how he draws. His speed is pretty incredible. There's people who can draw fast. I'm not fast enough to do a monthly book. It would look a lot different. I would have to pick a different style. I'd have to pick a fast style. Like if you've ever heard of Ted McKeever, he's another artist who's like, his detailed stuff is amazing. Like he was working on Doom Patrol, I think in the 90s. And you could definitely tell he was working to deadline. It still looks good, but it's a very different style from his later work. I think that's, I don't know, if you're going to work in that world, you kind of have to choose either to be like somebody who hits deadlines or somebody who your book's not going to come out every month. And I don't know, I mean, I understand you got to ship those books and make that money, but I don't know. I would much rather be able to edit and come back in and rework. Because the thing's going to be out there forever. Well, you know, not forever, but like, once you put something out into the world, it is out there. Much rather have something that I'm proud of on some level be out there than feel bad about it. Because if I've read everybody on here who's like knows about comics has probably read interviews with artists and stuff. I remember Lionel Francis Yu did an interview once. He said he really regretted there's this showdown with Magneto the X-Men were in, and it was I think it was like bi-monthly. He was doing the book bi-monthly with somebody, and he really regrets those pages because they're really not his best work. But he met the deadline. You know, he's a really, really good artist. But I do so few books, you know, because I got my other job and, well, not that this is a job, but my main job, and got other stuff I got to do. Got to mow the lawn. Got to help around the house, which I could probably always do more of helping around the house. Other stuff, got to take the dog out. Although that's fun. That's a good break. Probably gone on way more walks since we adopted Tootsie. That's a good thing. Yeah, who's another image guy that's really good? Yeah, the Cartoonist Kayfabe guys went over the first issue of Savage Dragon. That did look really cool. Very over the top. I've got some over the top characters in Princess Pizza. And some will show up in Wesley. Wesley's starting off much more grounded. One of those writing things that you kind of build your world before you mess it up. So that way when the crazy stuff starts to happen, it's more of an impact. Everything isn't just crazy from the beginning. And it's not too bad. But, oh man, 356. That went by pretty quick. Let's see if I can fill in some more of these black spaces. Is it still going? I think so. Just filling the inside of the oscillator here. The old dagger brush. Went to the Syracuse Art Supply store. If I did a one shot of any character, I know that I would really like to do Machine Man, but I don't really have a good story for him. Doctor Strange would be another good one. I don't really have a great story for him either. Wolverine may be too stereotypical, because anybody who's into art or drawing or comics who's around my age loves Wolverine. Let me dig into this question a little bit. Well, Martin at the comic shop and I are always trying to come up with the worst pitches that we can come up with. So if I were ever in an elevator with a Marvel executive, I could pitch them something that they would just find very repulsive. In the mid to late 90s, Wolverine became very feral, meaning he evolved into like an animalistic state when they tried to put his adamantium back in, and then the result of that was his design didn't have a nose. So I do. And I wrote a letter into Marvel, the only letter I've ever written to them, and asked them to give Wolverine his nose back. So what I would do is I would do a story called Wolverine Got Your Nose, and it would be like some mystical character popping up and doing the typical thing you do with a kid and say, "Oh, got your nose." Except he would take Wolverine's nose, and then they would have to. He would have to find clues that were scent-based clues around the world in order to get his nose back. Thank you. Thank you. Maybe have one fan there who'll get that made. I'll do a screenshot and send it to Marvel and be like, "Look, people want this book. Wolverine Got Your Nose." Love to do a Doctor Strange book. For whatever reason, they just can't get a Doctor Strange book right. They brought him into space. It's like, what are you doing, man? Just make it a haunted house book every month. And I'm kind of going and doing some shading. Yeah, why not? Silver Surfer would be another good one to do one shot of. He's like Doctor Strange in that the story can be as complicated or as simple as you want it to be. Like, you don't necessarily need to draw backgrounds in any of it. It could all just be creatures. Yeah, I liked the first issue of Strange Academy. The whole time I'm reading it, I was like, where's Doctor Strange? But I don't want to spoil anything. But you got Humberto Ramos art in that thing. I mean, can't go wrong with that. Yeah, I haven't given much of the writing that Scotty Young's done a chance. But I know he's been doing a lot of it with the Fairyland stuff and his Oz stuff. And he's his one book that he's doing. I don't know who the artist is on it, but it's got a robot in it, so it appeals to my my interests. And the covers on that thing look incredible. I don't know if it's Matt Kint who's on that too, or you know what I'm talking about? The Scotty Young book with the robot. I think the robot shows up on the cover in second or third issue. Yeah, I'd have to look it up. We can just look up Scotty Young books that he's done, and one would pop up probably. Yeah, I thought I was going to get to a couple of these other things to ink, but maybe I'll do another one of these. I wanted to talk about Pink Lemonade. I think that's a really good book coming out by Nick Cognetti, an all-ages book. But that also doesn't talk down to readers or try and be too simplified. I got a copy of that. Right there about this amnesiac motorcycle girl who I don't know what her story is just yet. She really likes orange juice. You'll figure that out later. All right. Yeah, if I had a hand free to Google it, I could probably figure it out. Just on virtue of those colors alone, I need to give it a shot. When in doubt, do a bunch of craggy ink in the background. Then when you scan it, you can increase that contrast. You don't have to erase out the pencil. Digital and gouache. Yes, I do some color. I really like the color, but the problem with comics is the drawing is really what moves it forward, so I haven't really done a ton of color except for covers lately, or just goofing around with some Copic markers or something like that. But there's also something pure about artwork that's black and white. I think it's probably just because I've seen so much bad comic book coloring that sometimes I'm like, okay, just show me the artwork black and white so I can actually see the artwork. Yeah, no problem. Thanks for hanging out, Weird Alpaca. Might do another one of these. This is kind of fun. It's kind of like me just recording me talking to myself while I'm working on stuff like this. It's an outer monologue instead of an inner monologue. Let's see, maybe just do some of that. When in doubt, big gestural brush lines with lots of ink. That's how we get it done. Well, he's in a cave or something, who knows? I think that's pretty good. Give Wesley maybe a little bit of a shadow coming off the foot. The problem with what I want to ink my stuff, easy, Bill Sinkovich, easy. Make it about 1,000,000 times better. The problem with using brush and ink is that if you have extra ink in the brush, you feel obligated to use it. That's not too bad. Alright. Kind of went all over the time there. It was easy to do. Easy to go over stuff like that when you're working on a couple different pieces. .406. Alright, I think that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in, everybody that tuned in. Appreciate that. I'd like to talk about artwork. I don't get to talk about artwork enough.